everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is David Grossman. I've been a journalist at Popular Mechanics, at Inverse, Rolling Stone, New Republic, and a bunch of websites that no longer exist. And I'm here today with such a terrific panel, and we're going to be talking about VR and AR and just the state of things and where we're at. It's going to be a really fascinating conversation. They have to put it in reference. I mean, this industry has been talked about and thought about for so long, but only in 1989 were items being brought to market. The first one was called the iPhone, spelled like this, and it cost over $20,000, but put out only 5 to 6 frames a second, and people were not into it. That it was too expensive, too bulky, and they couldn't figure out what to do with it. And that was the case for a long period of time. And now we're starting to see leaps and bounds. And I'm just so excited to talk about it all with our panel, who I will let introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Nitzan. I'm a designer, educator, and artist. I work for Meta Reality Labs Research, and I teach at Columbia Graduate School of Architecture. I create VR, AR, and immersive art projects, one of them with Mordecai about Jewish life on Mars.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah,
that's right.
All right, amazing. Hey everyone, I'm Jacob Loewentstein, so I'm the head of growth at Spatial, and we're honored to have you here in our office today. So personally, what's my spiel? So I got really into VR in 2014 when then Facebook bought what was then called Oculus. And I worked at BuzzFeed at the time, and it wasn't super relevant to what BuzzFeed was doing. But I ended up going to MIT for grad school, and I was like, I'm going to dive in. This industry is just getting started. And I went, and I thought this would be like Candyland for VR, and there was a lot of really cool stuff going on, but it was all sort of very siloed. And so I said, all right, I'm going to be the glue. So I founded this group, VR AR at MIT, that became the overarching group connecting everyone interested and working in VR and AR. We ended up founding a hackathon called the Reality Hack that I think is still the biggest VR AR hackathon in the world, and happens every year at the MIT Media Lab. And then from there, I went to Samsung to lead investing in VR and AR in a group called Samsung Next. We invested in a company called Spatial, which at that time was really just 2 really great founders, a tiny team, and no idea what they wanted to build. I think the original idea was trying to build the first operating system for augmented reality, and then they were like, oh wait, it might be too early for that. And then over the years, Spatial became first a collaboration platform, then a virtual events platform, and now has really settled in as a platform for games and gamified experiences. We really think that where the internet is going it's a much more fun and playful and immersive version of itself, and we think that's a language that brings people together in a way that the internet doesn't necessarily today. So I do all the boring stuff at Spatial, strategic partnerships, marketing. I'm by far the most expendable person at the company. So for now I work at Spatial, but it's awesome to have you here. And we we have insanely amazing people joining us from the companies that are also just building this industry. So listen up, because you're not going to hear it better than from Meta or VRChat or Spatial. So and last but not least,
hi,
Jeremy, who are you?
Jeremy Muhlfelder, also certainly not expendable, and I think a lot of the stuff you do is super fun, so just want to plug you for that.
Appreciate it.
Jeremy Muhlfelder, head of operations and legal at VRChat. My story is actually pretty similar to Jacob's. When I was in college, just was following tech trends and saw the Facebook acquisition of Oculus, also got the initial Google Cardboard, loved playing around with technology as things came to fruition. And then went to law school, kind of unsure of exactly where I wanted to go, but knew I wanted to work with startups. I worked with Israeli startups since I was a freshman in college. Went to law school, focused on law and entrepreneurship there, and ultimately went and practiced law out in the Bay Area for a few years, where VRChat was one of my earliest clients. Mentioned to a partner, hey, I love VR. Brought me to lunch with the CEO of our company, Graham Gaylor, and that was the beginning of my relationship with the company. I was there for about 3 years and realized I was just totally ready to not be at a law firm anymore and actually get back into building something. Being outside counsel, you get a lot of different cool experiences, but it's not the same as being in-house, actually building the thing. And so I left and I kind of pitched to the VRChat founders. I'm like, come let me join your company, be your first lawyer, and we'll see where it goes. That was about 2 years ago, and my role has really gone from purely legal to well beyond that, thank God, but is now heading up our operations team, which is kind of all internal support functions, but also sitting on our executive team, helping the company navigate business strategy and all sorts of other things. So love what I do, love VRChat. We'll talk more about it, I'm sure, but I think I'd also echo Jacob's last point on, I think the future of communities and social interactions is really this kind of almost gamified universe in a lot of ways, and leveraging immersive spaces, 3D spaces, for letting people come together when they can't physically be together. You saw that during the pandemic. That's a big reason we got some tailwinds during that period of time. And I think for communities generally at large, including communities like this one, offering that as an alternative to real life, not in place of it, but to supplement it, is a really important and powerful technology. So we'll talk more about that, but that's me.
Real talk.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Absolutely. And thank you guys so much for those wonderful intros. I really appreciate it. It leads very naturally into my first question. You know, as you all know, VR is such a personal technology. You know, it's all about that as soon as you put it on. And I was wondering, what are some of your first memories with VR? You know, pop culture, pre-stage technology, and this. So you know, either like a pop cultural memory or like an early experience of trying it that made you think, I want to like follow this further.
Wow.
I love it. You have to go back.
Yeah, you know what? I'm not sure. I mean, I think about there are two experiences I tried that were very, very personal early on. I went to the ITP show here at the time it was here at NYU. Now it's there at NYU.
Yeah, the ITP show?
Yeah, the ITP show, and then Sarah Rothberg and I forget the name now of the other creator. Sarah Rothberg created a very personal VR experience of walking around her childhood home with projected video footage on the walls in different locations. And I remember there was kind of this moment where VR was like pretty social. It was very, very personal, very spatial. My background is architecture, so I think that kind of that very personal experience of space and memories and personal history that way, I thought was something really, really unique. The other experience I tried was a VR shaman.
Oh, cool.
That was very, very cool. But again, like something really around the idea, again, pre-social, the idea that you're actually completely isolated in VR,
Right.
that you can't text, that you can't look at your watch, you can't do anything, you just pay attention.
Yeah.
And I thought there was something so interested in that beyond like the computer and spatial medium. I thought there was something so interested in that kind of isolation versus other forms of media at the time. Obviously, this is not the place VR is going, but
Yeah. No, I think that pre-social, the memories of pre-social VR will be very important to hold on to in coming years as it changes and evolves. Yeah, absolutely. Jacob.
Oh man, I feel like this is just gonna be like brain diarrhea, but so I think like pop culturally, the first time I became aware of VR, which maybe is probably true for a bunch of people, was I tried the Virtual Boy. Like I have a very distinct memory of going into a Blockbuster at some point in the mid-90s and trying a Virtual Boy and being like, why is everything red? It was not a very good experience. Like that was not when I got hooked, I would say. It was just like, this is stupid. And then, I mean, there were like other moments. I feel like my favorite thing of all time is that like the OG, like that like 80s VR is on an episode of Murder, She Wrote. So like if you ever want to watch like Angela Lansbury like in a really old school VR headset, it's like a plot point. But I think when I got interested in it, it really took me by surprise. Like in 2014, like VR was not on my radar at all, and I really had not been following the developments, if I'm being totally honest. Like I was really like squarely focused on I think the trend that I was following the most was how I felt like people were increasingly, like their perception of reality was increasingly shaped by what was being shared with them on social media. And that was what BuzzFeed was all about. Like scientifically, like the core concept of the company was like, we understand virality, the mechanics of it, and therefore like we have a distribution edge over other companies. And I think that the thing that I think in some ways like fear drove me to VR, because the thing that was really bothering me was that as information got shared, I felt like it became increasingly commoditized. It was just like, I don't care who discovered this fact or who reported on it or what outlet generated this. I'm just like sharing it. And I was like, wow, like the traditional setup of like originally print media, now digital media is like really in trouble. They don't own the platforms in which people are discovering this information. They're not like, now they don't control, like they don't own the attention anymore. Therefore they can't monetize it in the same way they were. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a big problem. And so the thing that led me to VR was the belief that like people needed to really value information or the experiences they were having enough that they would pay for it. And I felt like in 2D, people had just felt that information was commoditized. And so that was like I theoretically thought VR might enable the creation of types of experiences, like create wow moments where people would say, okay, wow, I'm going to pay for this because this is categorically a better way to experience simulation or information. And then I tried some like Oculus DK2 experiences that were like kind of meh, but like you're still in VR and you're like, holy crap. But I think the first, like I tried a bunch of stuff that I think I was like, this is okay. And then I think I was at Tribeca, the Tribeca Film Festival. They do a VR, like an immersive portion, and it must have been in like 2016 or 2017. I can't remember what year exactly, but they had this amazing experience where the artist, their mother had passed away, and they were trying to think about like how to tell that story. And they were like, well, I can only experience this in memory, that I'm never going to be able to communicate this to someone else. But they're like, how close can I get? And so they basically tried to like recreate their memory of their mother tucking them in one time. But then not only did they like create, use Unity to create like that memory graphically, they then had actors wear sensors, and they mapped the virtual space in a VR headset onto real world space, so that an actor was wearing sensors, so that when like the virtual mother moves their arm, it's because an actor was literally right in front of you moving their arm. And so an actor literally would tuck you in and like tell you the story, and they were using VR to kind of like mask reality for you to experience this memory. And it was like profoundly emotionally moving in like a way that I'd been to Sleep No More and things like that, but it was like by far the most immersive representation of anything that I had ever experienced that wasn't like a literal, documentary film of something. And that shook me to my core, and I like never recovered. I was like, okay, there's something profoundly different here that you can achieve. That was really cool. Yeah.
Wow, I'm like, that's crazy. Yeah, so my earliest experience, like I said, was like a Google Cardboard, not that impressive. A lot of my early days was very like information gathering, just understanding like tech trends, financing, things like that. So not as experiential. When I was in law school, my first summer after my first year, I was out in the Bay Area and I went to Meta. I went to all the big tech companies as part of this program. And we went to Meta and at Reality Labs, I don't know if that's what it was called at the time, and they had the full room VR setup. And we played like a very like down the middle like shooter game. Nothing particularly moving.
Right.
But it was the not full haptics, but it was, enough haptics on your hands, and really for the first time in my life experienced presence, like truly feeling like I was displaced from where my physical body was, feeling like I was somewhere else. And I remember taking it off my face after I finished playing the game, and it was just like that exact wow moment of I was just transported into another universe in a way that I've never experienced before. And I think for a lot of people, when they have that experience for the first time, your imagination just starts to wander. It's not just gaming, it's all these different experiences that you can simulate in a way that we've never been able to do before, with real-time rendering of 3D environments, and obviously a lot of work on Unity and other ways of creating these experiences, which is where we're getting to today. But that feeling of presence totally shifted my mentality from like, oh, this is an exciting technology that might get there, to like, we actually have that today, and I'm really excited to explore that more. And then from there, it really, once I went to my law firm, I worked with VRChat, I got to kind of hear a little bit about what they were working on and taking this concept of presence and applying it in this social way, which I do think, obviously working at VRChat, I'm very pro social experiences, but I do also think, honestly, some of the most compelling use cases are not social at all. And I think when you look at Apple's Vision Pro, a lot of their hand waving is actually about personal experiences.
Sure.
You noted that VR is very personal. It is social. We think it's social in a lot of ways, but I think these kind of personal experiences, maybe reliving a memory or things like that. I don't know. There's truly innumerable ways to use VR to experience something that you couldn't re-experience or experience for the first time for a variety of reasons. And so, obviously, I think this is a biased group, but the power of that technology, it was kind of a one and done, a 0 to 1. I experienced it once, and it changed me forever. And the last thing I'll say is there's a book by, his name's also Jeremy, I forget his last name. He's a VR researcher at Stanford.
Valenson.
Thank you. Yeah. I figured someone here might know the name.
Yeah, good dude.
But he has a book, Experience on Demand, and he talks about how that's exactly how Mark Zuckerberg was sold on buying Oculus in the first place. He brought Mark into his VR studio. He had him go out on this plank experience. You basically simulate walking out on this plank over a building. And Mark walked across the plank and basically dropped to the ground because he was so scared that he was going to fall off that he was basically on all fours holding onto the plank. And I actually have a similar app, which some of you may as well, that when I show friends VR for the first time along with VRChat, I always show them this plank app. And I've had friends literally physically convulsing almost because they thought they were on top of a building about to jump off of a plank off a 50-story building.
Oh my God.
Scary, but it kind of just demonstrates it's we're not even fully there yet, and it's already that powerful in terms of tricking your mind. It's
Right,
crazy.
yeah, that is crazy. And I find it so interesting. 3 very different experiences, but also all very personal, all very intimate. And as I talk about pre-social, Jeremy, you were playing a game with friends, but still it was a very, very personal experience. And now that very personal experience is being moved into a social field. It's being moved into the social area, and you get to feel that transportive feeling, hopefully with friends and with people you might not even know, especially in VRChat. I'm sure that happens all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're also a fully remote company, so we were talking before the panel began. It would almost be weird if we were an in-person company and weren't walking the walk of truly having a company culture building all in VR. But we have company meetings in VRChat. We have company hangouts in VRChat. We actually had a team retreat this year and finally got to meet in person for the first time, which was, I think everyone realized okay, the real world's pretty cool too, and I'm glad that we did this. That was not surprising to me, but there was a little bit of a shock maybe to others on the team. But I can go into this down quite a deep rabbit hole, but like you said, our company is fully distributed around the world, and the fact that we're able to, no matter where we are any given day, get into the same virtual space to collaborate and work together, and bring in talent with all these different perspectives across the world in a way it would be impossible to do that in a physical office. It's pretty amazing. I will say I've hung out with Jacob here a couple times. I'm a little jealous of having an office. This is an amazing space.
Welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But no, it's a really compelling way, I think, like I said earlier, as a supplement to the real world as opposed to replacing it fully.
Can I yuck his yum for a second? Sorry,
please.
but sorry, not to get contentious, but what's hilarious is Spatial had the profound opposite experience, and
Right.
it's what literally led us to pivot away from being a collaboration software. Because the first version of Spatial, you wore an AR headset like the HoloLens or the Magic Leap as well, and you would create a lifelike avatar using machine learning from a photo, and then you would basically see people sitting across from you as if they were really in the room. And it was really cool. I mean, we showed it. I mean, literally, there's a picture of Anand demoing it to Bill Gates. We showed it, and everyone would be like, "God, this is amazing. This is the future of collaboration." And then they wouldn't do it again. They would buy it, and then they would use it once every 6 months. So we're okay, that's them, but us, we're really gonna walk the walk. And we tried. We'd be okay, we're gonna do our meetings in Spatial, and we weren't even doing our own meetings in Spatial. We ended up defaulting to just Jumping into Zoom, and we had this aha moment sometime later in the pandemic where we're we're ignoring something right in front of our faces here, which is the friction, part of why an office is great, it's really like you lean into two things. Like one of it is the connection, which helps build trust. I think a lot of people, when they think about VR, they focus on that. They're like, there's presence, you really build deeper relationships. And it's like true, but the problem is that convenience tends to rank like in front of that, and that actually tends to be like the number one reason why offices are good, because it's like if I need someone, they're right there, and I can just like walk over to them and grab them. And Zoom is one click. And so how are you ever going to get someone to opt out of using something that takes one click on a platform they already have, like their phone or their laptop, to, choose to then power on a device that they don't use for anything else and go through like a whole onboarding, and like even the diehards were churning out of that experience. And so that was like the aha moment where we're like, okay, we think headsets are the future, but like for this particular use case, I think we realized we were wrong, and that's like why we pivoted the first time. We were like, this is not going to be used for collaboration anytime soon.
Right, yeah. So,
What was the question?
Who cares?
I agree. I remember when Horizon was coming out, and they were showcasing all the use cases, and they would talk about meetings, and meetings came up, and it just, on my Twitter feed at least, people were lighting it up. People were like, this is what you want us to do in this world of endless possibilities? You want to have meetings in them?
Right, you want to meet in like a Silicon Valley, but like it's funny because like, and we don't roast them, like it's like we worked closely with Meta, like Spatial's on the Meta Quest, but it's like when Horizon Workrooms came out, we had like just pivoted, and everyone's like, ooh, Spatial and Horizon Workrooms competition. We're like, actually no, like we're not doing this anymore. And our bet, and I don't know if Meta's still working on it, but like I think eventually Meta's not going to do it too, because it's just a couple of years too early. It's like, it's very useful every now and then for like a very particular kind of meeting, if like you really need to like whiteboard or like examine something physically. But like the trade-off of extra presence versus convenience is just not even close. And then the other issue is like, when it comes to presence, and this is actually like, I think VRChat has interesting views on this, but like avatars are very important in presence.
Yeah.
And Meta's working on a type of avatar in Reality Labs that's going to be like incredible, like truly like a facsimile of yourself. It's very difficult to create, requires a lot of computing power and a very long time, so it's not like close to being productized yet. But like, fine, if I could meet with someone that was literally you, and there was that level of presence, I might be motivated to like put on a headset. But if I'm gonna meet with like, a Simpsonized version of you or something, like, like it kind of feels like you're in the uncanny valley a little bit. Like the presence mostly comes from the physical interactivity. We high five, and again, those are fleeting moments of presence. It's not consistent. I think what VRChat has is really cool because it's a different kind of presence, because people like, VRChat seems to be mostly where people like express identities they can't express in real life. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's like, for use cases, sorry, go ahead.
I could build off of that.
Yeah.
No, just like, what are the superpowers for meetings? Like, meetings are what they are. There's not enough going on for me to want to put on a headset for that. But if I get superpowers like I get in VRChat, or I don't know what a superpower for a meeting is. Like they say, like infinite, like infinite whiteboards is, I guess, is not enough. For the meeting superpowers, so we have to discover what they are. But I think like VRChat is doing something really right in that direction.
I don't think down the line anyone's first wow moment with VR will be a meeting that they're in.
No, unlikely, but just to offer a counterpoint there, because we have meetings every day in VR, whether it's our platform. We actually use Workrooms a lot. We actually might be the largest user of Workrooms out there right now.
All right, so we're bringing people together. I love it.
But I think that's all right if you have the option of having an office and having in-person interactions. But for us, we've been a remote distributed company from the start. And so, like, in order to enable the most effective collaboration, we also, a lot of the people at VRChat don't want others to know what they look like, maybe not know their real name, except for me, because I'm the lawyer and I do all the documentation. But like, people really identify, to your point, people really identify in VRChat as their avatar, as their unique avatar name, but also like how they visually represent themselves. And so, like, Zoom isn't really an option for those people necessarily. They want to be known as their digital identity, and we could talk ethics and morals and how we feel about the future of the world because of some of these things, but it's absolutely the trend of the internet over the past however many years, and we are kind of along the lines of where things are going anyways. You look at crypto and things like that and wanting to remain, anonymous or pseudonymous, whatever it is. In terms of like what virtual meetings offer to me that's kind of unique is a Zoom screen is two-dimensional, and yes, you're able to see someone's face, but personally, I don't find eye contact or mannerisms in a 2D screen nearly as powerful as an avatar representation who I'm with in a physical room making eye contact. It's a very weird thing because you'd think seeing the person's real face and hands in a screen would be more effective. But when we have meetings in workrooms, for example, if I'm making eye contact with someone, like it has eye tracking, it can see where I'm looking. And so someone knows if when I'm talking, I'm looking directly into their eyes versus me looking at my screen and maybe looking at the camera, but really like in the background on Slack messaging someone about something else.
Totally.
And so it's certainly not a perfect thing. And again, it's not instead of or better than, it's a supplement to. And so sometimes we have Zoom meetings and those are really effective for actually seeing someone for business reasons. But when it comes to like engaging in certain conversations for other reasons, I actually find having a VR meeting, whether it's our platform or Horizons or whatever it is a really nice, different perspective on like being present with a group and having those conversations.
Right on.
Awesome. Yeah. In building these spaces, I was wondering, what is something that has surprised you the most as you've been building that?
It's really hard.
Yeah. It surprised you how hard it's been, or?
For sure. I mean, I think I joined VRChat like a little over 2 years ago, but it's been around a long time. I think we probably all would feel this way. Like VR's kind of been on the horizon, lack of a less punny way to put it, for a long time. And even at VRChat, Jacob and I talk about this when we've hung out before, like we keep getting close to releasing something and then it doesn't happen for a while. We've been going to release mobile for a long time now, still on the horizon. I know Spatial just released their creator economy. We're on the precipice of doing the same. Building 3D content, real-time rendering, all of those things, all the things that like go into what you need to have an effective live VR app is extremely difficult.
Yes.
Not to mention the like need to have a critical mass of people in there for it to be a good experience for your users. The cold start problem of like the idea of for any consumer social app where in order for it to be an effective app that gains traction, when a new user comes to your app, there need to be other people there for them to kind of be with and experience something positive. And so there are so many moving parts in what needs to happen for VR as an industry to be successful, as well as any of our individual apps. So that's the general point. I think specifically building and having enough content in a, again, live 3D rendered environment, to me, is something I underappreciated until being at a company trying to do it. It's really tough.
Maybe to build on that. So I think I'm gonna give a quick answer and then I'm gonna yes and what you're saying. So my quick answer is that like from the second I started like doing things in this industry, so like 2015, like the miraculous cure-all headset was always predicted to be like 24 months or something away, and I think like the like learning is just that like the pace of advancement in hardware, which is actually extremely important for the industry as a whole, because it's what is solving like a huge amount of the friction that like makes people not want to use VR, really doesn't move nearly as fast as you want it to. We're about to get to like the Quest 3, which is going to be good, but it's still kind of an incremental improvement on the Quest 2. And then you have like the Vision Pro, which isn't even like a straight up VR headset. It's really more of like an AR headset that does some like seated VR. To have something of that caliber, it's insanely expensive and super difficult to produce. They just had to slash the production estimates by half. So it's going to be a tiny market when this thing first comes out. And that still, in and of itself, is like generations, it's still too heavy. It has to be connected to a power pack, which a lot of people won't like. There are just elements of the experience that are still not there from a hardware perspective, where people could comfortably wear this. Oh, and there's this is super nerdy, but there's just a thing with your eyes called vergence accommodation, which is just how your eyes work in terms of how it focuses on things, right? As things get closer to you, your eyes they move in like this, and then your pupils, either they dilate or they constrict. And like VR can be very weird because it renders everything at like the same resolution right in front of your face, right? And so what you really need is for things to simulate like how the level of clarity you would see if you focused on them the way your brain thinks they are, you know, based on what distance it thinks they are. Like, so all these things are not solved, and so all these are things that lead to you after like 20 minutes of being in VR being like enough. And that's like right now, like 90% of people that try VR cannot do it for more than like 15 or 20 minutes. And we are like now 9 years into this like truly big renaissance of the industry. So like, I think that has been frustrating. Like, I understand, I don't blame anyone. I'm just like, this sucks that it doesn't go faster. This is just like, we're limited by physics and the realities of the world. And the other thing I'll say as beautiful music plays behind me is, and this was yes-anding you, like, there have been a million companies that have come and died whose like explicit goal has been like, we want to do for 3D content what like Adobe or like Figma, you know, like, or TikTok did for 2D video, which is to say like it should be insanely easy to create content, right? Like, you know, the phone camera, like in a good way, got very popularized in the late 2000s. You know, obviously the iPhone came out like 07, 08. And then over time, like video really started to explode because everyone had a camera, and tools started to become better and better in terms of like, okay, the camera itself is better, I can edit this just on my phone, and then that's, all of those things needed to happen for something like TikTok to happen, where now you're literally scrolling through a profoundly endless amount of video created by like a third of the earth. Like how we got, you know, there in 15 years is like pretty insane. And so people want that to be the case for 3D content. We are so far away from that right now. Like, it's still difficult, and it's not a criticism, but it's just because like there are just no shortcuts. It's like, okay, maybe I want to like get 3D assets. Well, yeah, there are databases like, you know, like TurboSquid or Sketchfab, but like they have a couple million models, and like that's not even that much if you think about how many objects exist like in the universe. And then you're like, okay, but I want to create like interactions in the universe. And you're like, well, that's code. And like we haven't automated writing code and like programming. So it means everyone has to have like some degree of familiarity with programming, or else you have these like super rudimentary tools where, you know, you basically create a virtual world where nothing happens. It's like box move here, and that's not particularly stimulating. So I think like what that leads to is like a real dependence on more sophisticated developers. And there aren't that many people that know Unity, for example, right? So like I think Unity has like a couple of million like active developers. Like that's like, you know, 100th, 1,000th of like how many people can build for mobile phones, right? Or something like that. So you end up having like a lot of focus on the same creators, trying to get them to like create stuff, and there just like aren't enough creators to like go around. I think what's really cool about VRChat is like VRChat was like the OG. Like when people were starting to get in the industry, like they were the ones that people gravitated to. So I think the experiences you find in VRChat that are good because like real OGs that learned Unity and have been like growing with it, like build in there. I wish there were more of those people.
Me too.
Or I wish that there were more people that aren't like them but could build at that level. And it creates this weird trade-off also where like, I feel like the OGs hold the industry hostage in a certain way. Like I know you feel this pain at VRChat where it's like, you know, we've had this sometimes at Spatial too, where we have like amazing community members that have been in the platform for like years, and like we're trying to make it more accessible, and in some ways they don't like that because they're like, oh man, here comes a noob coming in here, and like I have to show them the ropes, or like they're kind of diluting what we have. And it's like they love this like venture-backed country club, that virtual country club they get to live in, that just be kind of like is a way for them to meet up with other cool developers. And we're out here trying to be like, no, but we're trying to build this for everyone on the internet. And there's a real tension, like in terms of trying to expand this out, I find. And I think it's like a real cultural negotiation with like the current core of creators, trying to like get them aligned from a values perspective and helping on upskill new builders and make it more egalitarian and open to other people that want to join the experiences.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'll talk about it from actually a different angle. I teach a VR and world building course at Columbia Graduate School of Architecture. And I've been teaching it now for 5 years. I've been amazed at, like, at the beginning I had to teach the students. So the students, we do an exercise in world building and in Real Engine. The students, some of them work alone, some of them work in groups. 5 years ago, I had to grow. There was very little documentation for Unreal Engine online, and I had to. And these are architecture students, so some of them know some visual scripting, but they're not necessarily developer, or they're probably not developers.
Right.
And I had to do a lot of hand-holding for really just basics of programming and methods for debugging, and the last class I taught, last time I did it a few months ago, they just don't even, no one needs my help. Like, they they hardly need the intro. Yeah,
That's
they
sick.
just, like, whatever they want to do. It's just
The kids are all right. I love it.
Yeah,
It's
they
like-
don't need me to help them debug. Like, I don't know, for me it's really mind-blowing. And it actually, like, leaves a lot more time to deal with content, to look at design, to do the interesting stuff, now that it's so accessible, and it's absolutely amazing. I have to say, I think, like, it doesn't necessarily, it's not like 1-to-1 ratio with, like, how good the works are. Like, some semesters were better than others, regardless of how independent the student could be. But it's really amazing, and to me, actually, it shows that, so this is not like in a platform level. It's much harder, where you have to coordinate so many variables and so many moving parts. But if you think about a single developer creating an interesting world and wanting to share it with minimal interactivity, and for me, like, that's the thing that I'm most excited about in VR. There's a way to do that, and it's so beautiful.
For sure.
Yes.
Yeah, and so, like, if in every class I have, like, let's say 20 students, then, and some of them work together, so you have like 10 worlds in 4 months, and each of them is interesting and unique in different ways. Some better than others, but
Sure.
But some are actually, like, really some students get to the level where it's like it's really, it's like a game. It's like a nugget. It's a game that you could spend 10 minutes in, and it's going to be beautiful and fun and funny. Some students create worlds that are just, like, visually, and they have, like, a visual audio, something that is just really interesting and really fascinating that you won't get to experience otherwise. And it's kind of this process, or where I kind of what I really like and pull my students towards is, like, that experience of discovering a new space and trying to understand how that works, almost like the tutorial level of completely new universe. So I don't know, how exciting is that?
Feel inspired.
That's very exciting.
Yeah.
That's very exciting. And I'm curious. Generally, what are their spaces looking like when they're designing them?
So, I mean, mind you, also they're architecture students. So in my mind, they're, like, the most talented people in the world. Like, to do that, they have an amazing. They're coming with an amazing critical design thinking tool set. What does it look like? I think it's, well, the way I build the course is, like, it's a process to start from the beginning. So if the built environment around us represents the physical constraints of this universe, this world, this planet, then when we're going to design and game engine, we are no longer bound to these physical constraints. We can simulate alternative physics. We can simulate alternative causality. So that's a very kind of opposite way, almost, to say, like, create a game mechanics. But what we're doing is, like, starting from the beginning, like, script a very basic rule, and build an object that is influenced by this basic rule. And then from the object, we're kind of growing the scale, and trying to create a world where this object makes sense. And kind of continuing from there. And, like, how do you discover, like, you're a person in this world of objects? Like, how do you discover it? What's the mechanism? How does sound, light, shadow influence all these parameters? And yeah, so So the process is like the idea, or ideally, a student will start the class having no idea what they're going to end up with. Maybe seeing like examples for previous years, wanting to like to try that out, being excited for the outcomes, but for themselves not really knowing what it's going to be, and then that process is pretty exciting to see as well.
I imagine so.
Awesome.
Yeah. And the other answers you guys gave were also very interesting. Jacob, you're talking about that tension between like older community and like newer users. It reminded me a little bit. I don't know if anyone follows Major League Baseball at all.
Sure.
But Major League Baseball just this year went through a number of rules changes, which radically changed the way the game is played. Now instead of taking 4 hours, it can take 2 hours. And some people are like, this isn't baseball at all. But you know, the baseball made a choice that we have to change. We have to try to expand. Is it similar to that in any way?
I think like, well, I guess my dad and I disagree on the baseball rule changes, and I think my dad doesn't know what VR is, so at least he knows what baseball is. But I think like, I think the thing about new media, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. Like, it's always in conversation with what else is out there and what came before. And I think a lot of the people that have come to Spatial and probably VRChat and other platforms and that like were early on VR, like there was something they were dissatisfied with, like with whatever the status quo was at that time. And so they came and they created kind of their own, not to like be too like aggressive with religious terminology, but like their own little Garden of Eden, right? Like, you know, and so I think that's the tricky part, is like it started off as like a technological interest, but then the barriers became culturally useful for them, I think, to like hold a certain significance in a certain kind of space. And I think what is very alienating to a lot of creative people right now is the feeling that like content is abundant, getting someone to pay attention to you is like really, really difficult. Mm-hmm. You're, you know, essentially anonymous. And like, I think what motivates a lot of people is some hook to get discovered, right? Like, so for example, 2021, we had like a big influx of NFT artists. It was like, you know, I didn't even really, in 2019 I did or 2016 or 2017, when I was still at Samsung, I was like on a panel about NFTs, and I was like, NFTs are so stupid, like this makes no sense, like why does it have to be decentralized? And then like years later, all these NFT artists were like coming into Spatial and they were making virtual galleries, and like you talk to them and I was like, okay, I get that you're creating digitally, but like why should it be an NFT? And they were like, well, because it's almost like they were opting to learn a language that would allow them to communicate and like be noticed within a community where there was just the opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I think like people are just afraid of losing that edge. Like the earlier artists in the NFT space got kind of frustrated when like things started getting really popularized towards the end of the boom. And I think like people now get sort of frustrated by like some of the like, this is a rambly answer, but I just think these anecdotes are interesting. Like even the OGs of this round were getting called out by like the OGs of like the 80s for like not recognizing enough of like the research that was done in like the 80s and 90s that come before it. So like everyone wants to be appreciated. Everyone wants to feel like they like founded the place and built it up. But I think like all of our feelings aside, like the future marches on, unfortunately. Like, you know, we're all going to be forgotten to time at some point. And so I'm like, why don't we try and like spread joy and be as welcoming as possible? Like maybe this is like the Chabadnik in me, like wanting to like infuse that into virtual reality. So I think like, I think that what it meant, like all we can do is like talk to people, be honest about our intentions, and like show them that they matter. And then the rest is going to happen. And we hope that is enough to like bridge this divide as it's happening now. But it may not be. Like, we've had people leave the platform and go to smaller platforms because they don't feel appreciated, and it makes me really sad. But it's like, I'll say one more thing. Part of this is written into Spatial's DNA and VRChat's DNA and Meta's DNA, because we're venture-backed companies and Meta's a public company.
Yes.
And so the imperatives that like govern us essentially like push us to grow and scale. Like, we don't really have a choice. Like, we are profit-driven companies by definition.
Yes.
And I think like in the early days, there's no misaligned incentives between the platform and the creator, because we're just trying to get content, and like anyone who will give us attention,
Right.
they feel loved. When we try and grow, those incentives are suddenly misaligned because now we're trying to like move bigger than they are. So I do think that like there are some like more decentralized or more like indie kind of platforms that people have built, like, I don't know, like Neos or Somnium Space, that are smaller, that I think like will always probably be around and fit more of that vibe. But I do think like the VRChats of the world and the Spatials and like the Meta Horizons, like the goal, it's kind of like, is to become something bigger or die. And so it's like, it's sort of beyond our control, because that was like the contract we signed from the get-go, was
Right.
like build something for the masses or not at all.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of head nodding. Would you like to expand?
Yeah, it all resonates. This is this is my everyday. But just to the baseball question specifically, again, +1 to everything Jacob said, and also I think one distinction is in the baseball universe, like obviously the MLB wants to keep around the older fans, but if they kind of don't care if they don't actually stay as fans, they're like, we're going to shorten games because we want the younger, newer audience. They can not really worry too much about keeping an older audience if they don't want to. In our spaces, and Jacob noted this earlier, there's only so many developers, and they're almost all like OGs who've been around for a while. So we are somewhat beholden to what they need and want. So even if we do want to move into like a newer, younger generation, or not newer and younger, but like we want to expand to a mass audience, if we don't kind of keep in mind the earlier audience, they're the creators. They're the ones building the content for VRChat, at least in a lot of ways. So until we have a new generation of builders, of creators, people who are actually like creating the experiences within VRChat for all of the users to experience, we're nothing. Like we are totally reliant on our community and our creators. And so unlike the MLB, which can kind of be like, you know what, we just are going to shorten games and whatever, we'll have enough new audience, like we can't do that, because that would actually cannibalize our business. We wouldn't have the people to create the experiences for the newer users. So it's a really interesting tension. But the last thing Jacob said is like the most relevant, I think. Like, it's a really hard thing, and I think people at VRChat even don't fully understand that the early employees who came from our community, like, we are a venture-backed startup which has raised a pretty significant amount of money. That's the space I came from, so I come in with that perspective. But the average VRChat, early engineers, like, this is my home, this is where I spend my social life and my time, my best friends I've made on this platform versus the real world. And so it's honestly like easily the hardest problem I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, both internally managing the team, but also externally navigating our community of early users, and ensuring that they're heard. Our head of communities on our executive team, like, it is at the core of every single decision we make is how we consider the community, how we communicate with the community, all of those things. But again, talk about like building content being more difficult than I expected. I did not in any way fully appreciate how central the community piece is of this. And I think that's also very central to tech trends generally, whether it was the crypto movements around NFTs, and also not my thing either, but like the communities around NFTs, the community building on Discord and the like the future of the internet is community building. It's not, Twitter feeds with mass, like every single person on the internet in one digital space. It's slightly smaller niche spaces for communities of like-minded individuals like this one. And that is what VRChat is at its core, a place for smaller communities to come together, but the broader aggregate community of communities is still really, really important to us. So, it's a really hard problem to solve.
Well put.
Absolutely. Nitzan, do you have any thoughts on the generational divide, kind of teaching the youngsters coming up?
You know what? I think a friend told me something really interesting that also teaches emerging media. She asked her students who of them, or if they share any or upload any of their content to TikTok. And 0 hands were raised.
Really?
Like, yeah.
Mind
so it's
blown.
like when you guys were thinking, it was like, oh, but maybe it's like it's a longer tail distribution than what we are used to see, but that's what you're experiencing. And it really did, like, social media did became like a space for creators and not for regular users to express themselves the way it used to, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is really, I don't know, just an interesting generational trend, I guess. I wonder if it's going to change. Or
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I wanted to ask further about that because we talked a little bit about this before. And one thing that's been in the news recently, obviously, Roblox coming to Meta,
Sure.
huge. And Roblox as a platform is something that kids really gravitate toward. There's a great Substack I want to shout out. A friend of mine, Patrick's, called Crossplay, which is all about kids and gaming.
Yeah.
And he had a fantastic essay about his kid playing something on Roblox and getting scared, and his kid, stumbling into the wrong game, and having a tough time with it, and how parents navigate. Some parents don't let their kids play Roblox at all. And with VR, it has that immersiveness. And kids don't always quite understand that. So I was wondering, when you're looking at something like VR that can be so powerful, how do you approach building it for kids, or making it kid friendly or accessible?
Yes,
Oof.
they're not doing it.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, I was like, maybe don't. Like, they're interesting like just random interesting points. So like my sister, Dr. Joanna Loewentstein, great internist on the Upper East Side.
My sister's name is Joanna too. Didn't know
Listen,
that. Wow.
we're building, the relationships get deeper, but it's like, she has 2 kids, and her oldest, Enrique, he is like super into Minecraft. He's like 5, but he's not allowed to play Minecraft, so he just watches Minecraft videos on YouTube. So he's like aware of it and watches the videos, but he's not allowed to play it. Why do I bring this up? One is, I think that like there is a tension. This is a big societal tension between like platform responsibility and parental responsibility that has not been solved at all, and it's so much bigger than VR. And I think that maybe people are like hoping, like, so Meta went through like the first generation where they're like, wow, it's impossible to moderate things, so like we're just going to hire like a ton of people to like do this, and it's like okay, but still not great. Like, it's clearly like the problem of content is so far beyond the scale of like the ability to moderate and make it safe. It is unrealistic to expect for platforms to self-regulate and create features that discourage content creation in any way, because it like fundamentally, again, going back to like being VC backed or like a public company, like you're just not incentivized to do that, right? Like you're incentivized to aggregate as much attention as humanly possible and monetize it. And so like putting things into place that like discourage the promulgation of content that gets attention. By the way, scary things stimulate a lot of emotion. They get a lot of attention. So it's like that, like things that get attention are like Elon Musk, tweeting that like he can fart or whatever he tweet, like those things, like whatever these stupid things, like that's what gets attention. So it's like really bad and like very badly aligned incentives there. So I think my personal view is like either there needs to be regulation on this, which I would like gladly support, like regulate the hell out of it and just like push companies to take this really seriously, or it's going to fall on parents, and like parents need to wake up and get educated. I mean, like my bad answers are like right now, like because we don't feel like we have no idea how to deal with kids, we've just been like, we're not dealing with it. Like our terms of service is 18 and up. If we lower it, like maybe we'll lower it to 16. That's not even going to be foolproof. Like kids may still like make it in. We are going to have a system where like mature spaces get tagged as mature. Like we're going to try and segment, like mature meaning like probably maybe like violence. I don't think we're figuring out like what that term means on Spatial, but or scary. But that's like we're gonna hit a limit of what we can do, which is like, and I think similarly like that's the content that we know, and then there's like the trolling, and people troll adults. Like we have a system where people can report, but in that circumstance, what we've tried to do is just really empower like the owners of the space to police it as they see fit. We're like, okay, this is your space, you created it. So we're going to try and give you the tools to like ban people or only limit people that like register accounts, or all that is doable within Spatial. So I think to summarize, like I don't think there's some sort of UX that we haven't thought of that's like, oh, if I just put a modal up that's like, hey, are you a child? Like take this headset off is going to work, or something like that. And I think that a lot of this is going to come down to like parents policing, platforms doing their best to like, I think, create some hurdles in place. And then the big question mark, which I'm sure if it hasn't been the topic of one of these, I'm sure it will be in the future, is like AI, but obviously like that's its own rabbit hole of like how biased are algorithms, and like who decides what is or isn't kosher in the broadly in the colloquial sense. But like I think we have part of our stack that we employ that uses like some kind of AR to flag like offensive usernames and things like that, and it's like only somewhat effective. Like so we explore this and lean into it, but like so far we've been like kind of disappointed. It really is not super effective, and so technology is improving rapidly. Like maybe we'll be in a world where like AI could recognize a child's voice or behavior and notify a parent, and like we could empower parents better through tool making like that. But I could tell you that like this year, like right now, those tools don't exist, unfortunately.
Sure, yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, again, I feel like I keep saying this is such a hard problem to solve, because they're all pretty hard problems to solve. I'm a big believer that like exponential technologies offer exponentially amazing benefits, but also have exponentially dangerous risks. AI is a good example of that. Autonomous vehicles, good example of that. Really awesome benefits, but if something goes wrong, you have a system of interconnected autonomous vehicles. The potential downside of that is quite significant. Same thing with VR. It's amazingly powerful from a presence standpoint, but when put into the hands of a bad actor, it can be really abused, as with anything. And there's bad actors all over the internet. There have been since the beginning of the internet, and so this is no different. It's just aligning with tech trends, and so it does pose some reasonable risks that have to be taken seriously. I totally agree with Jacob that even in terms of the approaches regulators are starting to take right now, as a lawyer, like I am pro regulation when done in an intentional way, engaging with the private sector. But a lot of these regulations that are being proposed are very obtuse and don't really work for what's needed for an immersive 3D environment. Things like age verification even have not really been done in a seamless, smooth way. And it's very easy for a regulator to say, you need to verify someone's a certain age. It's very different for companies of various sizes that are trying to get off the ground to abide by those things. We're big enough now where we'd be able to handle that, but it's same thing with the GDPR from a data privacy perspective. It isn't a completely unreasonable thing to expect companies to abide by, yet it was forced down on every company that exists that has users in Europe. And so I find this to be in the same ballpark. At the same time, recently, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act was basically left as is by the Supreme Court. But like as a human, as a moral person, like I don't think platforms do enough. Not as represented in VRChat. I think like we do have an obligation to go a step further than any platform does right now, because these are real problems and without easy answers. But my gut feeling is what Jacob said last as well, that it's a lot about putting the tools in hands of parents and making clear who is responsible for what, because AI tools will not get us all the way there for a long time, nor can every company hire enough trust and safety agents to deal with everything that's happening on their platform when they have millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of users. Yeah. That's not a realistic thing. And also talk about their lives being terrible. At Meta, I know they went through a horrible thing from a mental health standpoint of dealing with horrible things on the ground. So, again, another really tough problem.
Looking for a good job listening to people say racist things all day.
Exactly.
Trust and safety agent. It's
or ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really it. Just it's a hard problem, but I think getting creative companies like ours like working together on like what creative solutions we could come up with to help move the needle. Like it doesn't have to be a perfect system, but one step in the right direction I think would be really helpful.
Awesome. Yeah. Nitzan, do you have any?
One question: do you guys have invite-only spaces?
Yes.
Like we need because that
Yeah.
could be a children's play date
Yeah. So
or an adult playroom on the other end.
totally, it certainly can, and I think it's both good and bad, right? I think that does enable parents to put their kids in a room together to play in a very safe environment, but it is also a place for an abusive actor to take advantage of an invite-only space that then can't be monitored by a public roaming trust and safety agent. So it's a double-edged sword. I do think the combinations of those things, we release groups and all these different types of instances that are public or friends only or invite only, and I think, again, this is a pretty nascent organizational structure. I think as we continue to play with that stuff and impose different rules on each of them, we will kind of start to discover how can we best optimize for safety of people. But every time you kind of uncover something that might be effective, you do realize that it also is a potential way that it could be abused by someone in the wrong hands.
I'm realizing we're ignoring an important but implicit part of the question, which I think, because I think a lot of what we're talking about is true just generally of social media, but I think specifically because we're talking about VR, I think a part of this is like the degree of immersion and like whether that poses risks for children. And I mean, I'm sure probably, like I think the problem is like this just reminds me of like TV screens getting larger, and there's like some flavor of like don't sit too close to the TV, or like what are my kids watching when I'm not home kind of thing. And I think that like what's very strange, right, is like I grew up in a generation where I felt like very unmonitored in terms of media consumption. Like I was on the internet before my parents, or like social media before my parents really knew what was up.
Yeah.
And so I was just getting like unfiltered whatever. And I'm sure my therapist is paying the price now of like that.
Well, you're paying the price.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, you know, so this is just a personal philosophy. Like I'm generally an optimist about these things. Like I think I think there's a lot of pearl clutching where we think like, you know, this generation is going to get corrupted because media is getting more powerful, more toxic. And I think there's like the truth is somewhere in between. I think that's like true. But I also think that like generation after generation has shown this like weird ability to grow somewhat jaded and develop weird like defense mechanisms against certain kinds of content. Like I choose not to watch horror movies ever because I hate them. So like
Me too.
I'm able to like block that out, and like I've developed a certain amount of media literacy, so I can kind of like feel out when like something really terrible might be like about to be on screen for me or something. I can't say that that's en masse. Everyone has those skills. I think that like, you know, 20, 30 years from now, it'll be interesting. I mean, young people are going to be experiencing a lot of VR like over the next couple of years. It's just going to happen.
Yeah.
Like the headsets are going to be there. The parents are not going to like police it all the time, and same way that it happened with phones. And you know, putting away like the literal impact it may have on eyes. I'm not an ophthalmologist or optometrist. Like I don't know what being in immersive media when at that age and that phase of development will do to people, but I'm guessing that like it's probably, after they consume enough of it, going to make them in unexpected ways jaded to things that maybe we weren't as jaded to. And so behaviorally, that'll probably mean that like that generation of kids are a bit different than the people that came before them. I don't think better or worse. I just think like different.
Right.
But I think like in like the big trope in like 2014, 2015 in VR was like the whole empathy machine thing. It was like, no, but with VR it's different because it's so immersive. Like this tool is so powerful. It can change hearts and minds, or it can like destroy your brain. And I'm like, I don't actually think that's true. I think like if you watch a lot of like really sad VR experiences, eventually you'll just kind of get jaded to it. If you watch a lot of experienced ones, like you'll kind of learn what to expect. I mean, this goes a little bit like I had very profound experiences in VR, but I just think the human brain has these weird mechanisms of adaptation. Like, and so I'm not a like I'm against the like VR empathy machine people that think there's like something like fundamentally unique that humans won't adapt to about VR. I think there was like a very like elitist sort of like we're going to save the world with this kind of mentality. Like this is how we're going to make people care about what's going on. And I'm like, no, like people are still not going to care. It's just now, instead of like ignoring news, in the same way that people were astonished by like the first war photo, and now we don't care, an entire newspaper's war photos, and it doesn't faze us. Like the same is going to be true of VR as well, and I think the kids will be okay. And you should probably be cautious about putting like an infant in VR. Like use common sense. Like I don't.
That reminds me of the Civil War photos at the time, Matthew Brady photos, which horrified the nation. And then after the war, they were used as windows. They used for windows, and most of them, and many of them were lost. So that might happen with VR to some extent.
Most definitely.
Yeah. I believe now is the time for some Q&A. I believe. Do we have any questions? Yes.
So I would say, as like a content creator in VR, this is just like a moment, right? Magic moment would be like creating something and then just putting it on, like putting VR on, and like wow, and then this whole world I created. You guys talked about friction and like I guess the challenge of using the tools. Jacob talked about that, like how challenging it's been in Spatial. Nitzan thought it was like not as big a deal. I still think I'm with Jacob on this one. I think it's kind of like it's just hard to get a lot of people.
We need to hire some of our students. I think that's like the takeaway.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about what you guys think about generative AI in terms of just catalyzing 3D development in the long run. Will there be some kind of inflection point that we don't see or we see coming, we just don't know when it's going to be, that will facilitate a lot of 3D content creation? Just get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll kick us off. I've got some thoughts. Absolutely going to be a big part of any successful 3D immersive environment. I think just how it's implemented really matters. So for example, like our user base, it's like a content flywheel, right? You need people to create content, users to consume the content. We're launching a creator economy, Spatial already has, and it creates a flywheel of users are then willing to spend money on a creator's content. The more money into the ecosystem, the more creators come to the ecosystem. They then create more content because they're making more money. More content means more users, and it kind of creates an organic cycle. And making sure that all parties are properly incentivized to be there matters. And so I think there's a fear from creators in VR and in any space right now that they're going to get displaced in the ecosystem by AI completely. Yeah. So if VRChat were to say, we as VRChat are going to leverage generative AI to create all these experiences because we probably could, that would mean we don't really need our creators anymore. But that would inherently cut against the fact that we're a community-based platform and one that is derived from our creator community and our user community kind of being intertwined in this pretty awesome way. And so deploying generative AI, in my view, needs to be done kind of as a tooling option to creators to let them still continue to drive content creation. We're a platform. We don't want to be a first-party content creator all the time. I know Spatial is doing some of it now. We absolutely will at some point, but we don't want to be the main creator of content for VRChat because that limits us to just what we are creative enough to think about. Yep. We want every person on Earth to eventually, the tools aren't that easy right now, anyone on Earth should be able to come in and build content in VRChat however they are artistically inspired to create. And so deploying generative AI as a tool for them to create NPCs, to have storylines fully drawn out for other whatever. Your imagination could wander how you could deploy generative AI, but to me, it's a lot about like using it as a tool for creators. And the second piece is rendering in real-time 3D environments is extremely difficult. And if you need to pre-bake all of that at the time of creating an experience, that is a lot to deal with. However, if you are able to take and this is as a non-technical person, my understanding of where we could eventually get to. If you were to use a 360-degree camera and take a picture of a place and use generative AI, if you were exploring that space as you get closer to the edges, generative AI as you move could help continue to render the environment around you. I don't think we're quite there yet, but you would be able to use it you would need less to start with, and generative AI could help kind of fill in the gaps in the picture as you experience something for the first time. So there's kind of twofold. One, tooling for creators, and two, easing the burden of initial content creation. Instead of needing to create a 100 square foot digital environment from scratch, you could create way less probably and use AI to kind of fill in the gaps.
It's fun. Yeah, I didn't think about the procedural generation aspect. It's something else really small, procedural generation.
Totally.
And balancing the tension between the OGs and the people who are new, and not displacing like the environment artists of the world, right?
Exactly.
Your skill set is building like a super high quality ZBrush model of like a plant or something like that.
Mhm.
And by making that, like commoditizing that, yeah, I guess like killing the livelihood. So just like balancing how that transition is interesting. Let's say that.
For sure.
I think one thing that this opens generative AI opens the possibility for many people to become creators,
Right.
and that
Yeah.
wasn't a possibility for them earlier. So again, you will have that community tension because people who are not creators, or not in the clique, who are not in the right places, suddenly are empowered to create content
Right.
and to have their voice. So that's exciting, interesting, scary, brilliant things, but it's definitely going to change a lot. So yeah, I never thought about it in the community context until now, but it's obviously going to influence it. But still, I think there are a lot of people who are like, there's the person who wants to create content, and a lot of people really just want to experience it. So the overall, I think, is, for the better. if I had
Agreed.
to.
There's only like so far out I can imagine. Like, I'm just an unimaginative person, but I would say like in the short term, it seems like where the opportunity is it's useful for like somewhat verbally talented people, or people that develop the skill of like prompt engineering and can then figure out how to like employ it in very specific ways. So for example, like in ChatGPT, like you can get code as output now, so that's pretty useful. Like I don't write C#, but I could get ChatGPT to like give me C# script that I could put into Unity. But I would need to know how to tell it exactly what I need. So like that's sort of that's like the local limit today. And then I think that will evolve, and probably as there's just like a larger corpus of data to train on, it'll start to get better understanding like intent or like unimagined possibilities, and it might start to prompt you and be like, well, do you want to do this and this? So that'll, I think, broaden and make the tools easier to use. I think it definitely, when it comes to visual creation, there's certainly like, that's a difficult translation to take what you see in your mind and like communicate it even to like a human being if they were your assistant to create something for you. So like there will be, the person who doesn't need that translation will have an edge, but like the people that are willing to spend the time on learning how to do that translation will benefit from it. I think, I think probably like in the near future, the like valuable skill set will move. Maybe if you like think about like end-to-end creating like a 3D model or like an interaction from scratch, like it starts to move more into the stage of like customization and refinement, because you can get like kicked off very easily. You could be like, I want a cat and I kind of want it to look like this, and so you'll get like something generic looking, but is it going to be the specific cat that you really had in mind? Well, no, maybe at that point it's easier to like go in and make subtle changes yourself. Or like we have a game in Spatial called like Infinite Ascent, this like fun climbing platformer game, and like there's some like really weird small parts, like things you jump on and weird interactions that I think like would be strange to refine. So I think I feel like it would be hard to do that like today and over the next couple of years. I do think we talked about TikTok a couple of times throughout today, and I think there's an interesting phenomenon in video, like happened in music, now is happening a lot in video, which is like the phenomenon of like really easy remixing, right? So like in music, it was not easy to like cut something and then chop it together, and then over time that became easier. But like the way that like people were doing it in like the late 70s was like wild, right? It was like literally recording something off the radio and like okay, and then in video that was definitely true, but now it's like insanely easy to like remix video. You can like TikTok literally just like grab someone's video, put text over it, intersperse your own narration and videos of yourself. It's starting to happen, I think, in like 3D. Like games are building in like modding tools or like making things available to encourage people to do that, but I think that's still generally limited to like a fairly sophisticated audience. But I think like learning from the modding world will be like interesting. I think like the more that the database of things that can be remixed becomes available, I think like an AI will I think play a part in like building out that base. I think that'll be really interesting, and I think AI is also interesting in helping you like quickly test out variations in remixing as well. And I think that's like one of the like less, like it gets a bit into what you're talking about. It's a different kind of procedural generation. Like there's the procedural generation of like there are blank spots, like the No Man's Sky, I'm going to create the universe, or there's blank spots in this world and I'm going to imagine what it looks like. But I think this sort of like creative type of imagination, like I don't know if I've seen like great examples of that yet with AI, but I think that could become really interesting where it's like there's so many things out there, just like keep smashing them together over and over again until I find something I like, and that's like a pretty interesting tool for humans to then use taste, whatever that means, to like pick that out. And then but beyond that I'm like I can't, it's too far out for me to like even imagine.
I just thought it'd be interesting because it's like it limits the friction in like creating the content. I can even see like overlap, right, where someone just creates concept art in Midjourney,
Yep.
and instead of having like a level designer being like, okay, like here's my concept art level designer or environment artist, build it out, just like, you know, send that portfolio of images into Unity directly, and then be like, okay, boom, here's like the environment, here's like the level you want.
So that's happening. Like there's a company whose name is totally escaping me that just uses like Midjourney to create skyboxes in your 3D. Blockade Labs, yeah, exactly. So they're using Midjourney for that, and I've definitely met some couple of like studios that are literally like just creating all their textures for things now, and like and so it's impressive. Like we're kind of already there at that phase, which is really cool.
Any other questions?
I had a question.
Yes, and your name.
Alter, I'm with Tora VR. Hello. It seems like right now the industry seems to be very venture and investment backed. It's not so much from the people, you know, customers. I know there's going to be a few technological things that need to advance. The headsets need to get a little more quicker, snappy, real-time, better processing. More content has to be on. Just curious what you guys would say are like the key ingredients that need to be in place. For sure, hardware and content, but like if you could like hone in somewhere that you think like key pieces that are missing, that if we get this and if we get this, then like what's the path basically to profitability in the market? And if you could give like an estimated timeline on that.
You could be profitable today.
Yep.
Like that's the thing. So I guess they've sold like, sorry, not to be like combative in my answer, but I think they've sold like 20 something million Quest 2s, for example, they being Meta. And a sizable number of applications in the Quest store have generated upwards of $1 million of revenue, like more than you would expect. And many of them are not venture backed, like a lot of like bootstrap studios doing it. Now, a lot of people poo-poo that because they're like, oh, like, you know, there are like 50 apps in the Quest store that have made $1 million, but there's like, you know, 10,000 million thousand apps in the iOS store. So it's like, I think the problem is people keep comparing like VR to mobile, and like I don't know if that's ever going to be the right comparison. Like I think VR for the foreseeable future is more like console numbers, so like tens of millions of units. So you need to be like satisfied with a, I think, like profitability, just not quite the same sort of profitability. But like there are tons of profitable companies in VR today. I think the key thing, I mean, honestly, I would say like it doesn't make sense for like most companies to take venture money. I'd say it probably hurts a lot of VR companies because the scale required, if you're going to be like exclusively focused on headset, like it's just not there. Like all like VRChat and Spatial are both available off headset in order to like achieve the scale that you need in order to like justify those types of businesses. So if you were really focused just on VR, I'd be like, don't take venture money and bootstrap it. And then the companies that have done really well in the like upfront sales still works pretty well. Like in VR, like you can charge for apps in VR and people pay for them. That's how like Beat Saber, you know, initially made its money. Like of course they added like music packs and things like that afterwards, and then companies like Within really brought like subscriptions to the fore, and it makes sense in certain contexts of like recurring usage. But I wouldn't shy away from just like a good experience that people don't have to do more than once, that they pay a little bit of money for, that like is appealing with the right marketing can do well. But I will say that all of the experiences that have been profitable pretty much, I think almost all of them like are essentially games. Like there needs to be like a very clear core game loop. So like, I didn't get a chance to experience like Torah VR yet. We can change that, but like I saw like someone was in like the base of Migdash, I think, on like the screen. So like, if you wanted to like have a profitable experience where like someone was like taking a tour of something, of like sites or whatever, like I think the problem is like there's a lot of free content. People are kind of like giving that sort of like stuff away, like Time and different companies like that like give away sort of content like that and try and put ads in front of it. I think it would be difficult for you to do that as like one experience. So I might just think about like, how do I create a really compelling gamified experience that still tells the story and speaks to the values that I have as a creator. But the game is really key, because like the people that pick up their Quest more than once, like a lot of them only do so because they think of it like a game console, some of them like a fitness tool. And so you don't want to try and sell oranges to someone that wants apples. I'm really mixing metaphors tonight, but like it's like that was our big learning at Spatial. Like I think, and this goes back to what I said at the very beginning, like I think a lot of this is about like the next phase of the internet being built by people that understand games. And I think like games can be very broadly defined, but I think like, I mean, I'm totally blanking on this academic's name, but there's like a really good framework that like defines the way that people play games. But it's like, there are basics to it, right? Like, are they doing it for status? Are they doing it for competition? Like, you need some of those elements to make it sufficiently stimulating. And then if it is, I think people will pay for it and you can make good money. And I'll say that, sorry, but like I don't know if this is like going to be controversial, but like, so for example, like the Torah VR, like the thing is like you could also think about like ways to broaden your market. Like you could try and market that specifically to Jewish people. But like I think about like in Jerusalem, there's like, what is it, like the King David like museum is like a big stop. But man, like people from different religions like go to that, like, and so like I think there's an interesting opportunity with content that has like some type of religious component to really broadly appeal. And I think that like particularly in like religious, it's like we live in a world where it's very hard to promulgate religious messaging. Like people don't like, it's like it's harder and harder to reach people. And so I think you'll find a lot of institutional customers that would be really interested in things that help teach some like of Jewish scripture or whatever it is, even to a broader audience than you might expect. I guess this is my like PC way of saying like get evangelical Christians to spend a lot of money. I guess that's what I'm really saying. Like,
Here.
Thank you. My name's Aaron, also from Torah VR. That's definitely come up in the office a few times. We don't shy or beat around the bush. We just say, let's sell it to the Christians. And there's a lot of demand for it. We've had discussions there, and there are halachic issues potentially to create content. But anyway, that's not my question. On our pre-seed deck, and we went on to raise over $1 million from a famous Hollywood producer about 18 months ago, thank God. But,
congratulations.
Thank you. We had a why now slide, because we decided to do it. One of the why now reasons was verbatim. Pattern activity indicates that Apple will be releasing a headset within the next 12 months, so
right.
off by about 3 to 5 months, which will put VR into undisputed mainstream territory. That was the line. That was the why now line. And now it's here. The moment has come, right? January 6th, June 6th, right? A month and a half ago. Sorry. That's the CNN Fox.
Yeah. Now we're back to what, D-Day? Is that okay? Yeah.
So June 6th hit. It's here, and I don't know how I feel. I don't know if that still remains true, even though we were on the money that it came, right? And now we look very smart. But do you guys being deep into the VR industry? I know it's competitive to you directly, but we can still speak about it objectively. Do you feel that now that Apple has entered the space, VR will definitely become, or 80% plus chance of joining the mainstream?
No.
No.
I don't. Also, January 6th is my birthday, so ruined forever.
Nice.
Happy birthday to you.
It's tough out here.
I saw you and your friends celebrating at conference. You went hard.
You know how many times I get that comment now. It's unbelievable. It was a great party, though. No, I don't. I think it is validating, but in a lot of ways, like you had it in your slide, a lot of people suspected that that was going to be the case, and it was confirmation of that. And in a lot of ways, again, it's a validating thing. It's a major player, the best creator of consumer hardware, is now throwing their hat in the ring with something very compelling, kind of taking the like Tesla model and the Apple model of releasing something that everyone wants, but not everyone can get, expensive. Eventually, the price will get driven down and be more accessible. So I think the path to that being a headset that is, affordable for most people is there. I think it is absolutely still not a guarantee that VR is ever much bigger than it is now. I do think it will be, but I think to say that it's anything more, it's a step more likely, but a step, not an exponential leap. In part because it was somewhat priced in terms of my expectations personally, and in part because it kind of ties to the last question. There's still like this combination of things that need to be done completely right for this to work. And we haven't really seen a killer app in VR. Like VRChat is maybe the closest thing, and it's like I'm biased so in heavily favor of VRChat, and I wouldn't say it's a killer app. Like I think we have product market fit for a lot of people in a pretty niche audience, albeit a big niche, but we don't have product market fit to the average mainstream person. Yeah. And for Apple to be successful, and therefore for the VR market to be successful, it needs to reach the mainstream. It's kind of like PC gaming. Like I had a PC gaming phase when I was younger, and it's awesome in a very big market, but that is not TikTok. So for VR to be, it depends what your level of success that we're striving for is. But I think no matter who's in the market, until the social proof is there of like people want to pick this thing up and use it every day, every week, whatever that metric is of what we consider success, until it happens, I won't feel fully confident that it's there. And I'm an ultra tech optimist too. Like I think we will, but the lawyer in me is now critical of everything, and I'm like, I don't think it's a guarantee. So I don't know if you two feel differently.
I feel it does create, well, I mean, the headset they're shipping is obviously very expensive, and they define it as a developer kit, but it does suggest a path towards something that's cheaper, more accessible, and for someone like Apple to weigh in with their reputation, to weigh in to the industry, I think will help us grow it together. And I'm very curious to see what they're doing, and I think it will support the industry, but I don't think it's going to happen overnight at all. I think it would create more buzz, more interest, encourage people who were just not that interested until now to check this out. And maybe it feels like timeline-wise, we might be on the same timeline of like 5 to 10 years.
Always.
Yeah.
5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Love a good 5 to 10 year timeline.
Well, 5 to 50, still on the same.
Hedge your bets, that's...
Yeah.
I think the cool thing, the thing that's really interesting is like, man, Apple really positioned themselves like diametrically opposite of Meta. Like Meta, Meta when they started in VR, like they were really focusing on like to be really immersive, and then eventually also like really social. And Apple is like, no, this should not be immersive for the most part at all. And like actually like the social aspects of it we don't think are like there right now. And so what I think is really interesting about Apple's approach is that I think it's like a weird kind of like Trojan horse kind of approach. Like I think they sort of are trying to make you think that they've developed actually just like a peripheral. Like I think they're trying to basically convince you over time to be like, oh, you should own one of these instead of a TV and a monitor. You shouldn't have screens in your home. And we don't want you to be cut off from anything, so people can see your eyes, albeit in this like weird hazy way. And I think that feels to me like their clear ambition, and like I don't think they have any ambition in the near term of like really supporting like very interactive like VR. Like they really like don't want people playing Beat Saber in their headset. Like they don't view it as a fitness application. Like, and these are the things that like Meta, these have been like the big successes, like shooting games, fitness games, like sword kinds of games. So I think that they're like, which one ends up, if one ends up on top, like if this is not, if there's not another path to market that we just haven't like envisioned yet, like what Meta's essentially betting on is that like the next great game console needs to be like pretty immersive and like interactive. And I think maybe like, I don't know, like I could see that. Like I'm sure Nintendo's had that thought, like where, you know, they're like, we don't love that gaming is quite so passive and sit back. Like we would like people to be like more participatory. I think Meta's trying to hedge its bets. Like in Quest 3, they're adding mixed reality. There's going to be pass through. But it's just like probably not going to be like, there's a reason Apple's doing it the way they're doing it. It's because they know for people to meaningfully use those features, like they need to feel very not disconnected from the world around them. And I think what Apple is basically trying to say is like, actually most of the applications you're going to use this thing for are not particular to this device. Like what this is going to ship with is a ton of iPad apps. It's going to ship with the main application is just you have a big screen and you're going to use it to work and you're going to use it to play like video games and watch movies, and they're going to be like a couple of cool things that like nod to the future of things getting a bit more immersive. But like I think like those are really not going to be the big use cases, and I think they're going to see like whether they can get the price of a headset down to a price of like a somewhat expensive TV or something like that, and that it'll be like kind of comfortable too. So, and that's a really interesting Trojan horse, because like eventually Apple's just hoping you're wearing this peripheral, and if they can get you to wear it for long periods of time, they can start to introduce applications that aren't necessarily like materially better than the one you use on your phone or whatever, but you're going to start using it because it just works for the thing that you're already using. So it's kind of how certain applications have taken off on mobile, where it's like, is this really like better than the competitor that's on desktop? No, but I stare at my phone so much that the fact that it's just easily accessible to me gives it a wedge into my attention span. And I think Apple understands that better than anybody because of like their learnings from the App Store. And so I think that's like how they think about this headset. So I think it's kind of, it's not what we all expected. I think we were all thinking like 3D FaceTime and like some of this stuff. But I think like that competitive dynamic is really cool. I would agree, like in the short term, it probably doesn't like change anything for a developer that like, I think in every VC deck I've ever worked on for Spatial, we were like, well, with the Apple headsets releasing in the next 6 months, like, and this, I mean, we thought it was like, like there's always like some Bloomberg article from Mark Gurman that's like, yeah, it's happening, like, don't worry. And like, so I, at least the thing that's really like changed in me in terms of like fundraising and like running a startup is like I've become really allergic to like why now depending on actions from like big companies. Like I think the idea of like we're gonna ride a wave that's generated by this thing that this like other company does, I think a lot of VCs have become very allergic to it. They've just been burned repeatedly. And I think the easier close now is the wave has already happened. Let me prove to you it's happened. So like, it's easier to like, I'm not saying I would like, this is a company you should do or like invest in, but it's easier to be like, applications have moved to the cloud. Google Docs are really popular. Figma is really popular. So therefore I'm going to make X piece of software that already exists, but you're going to access it in a web browser. You don't have to say like, well, the web browser is coming and this and that. You can just be like, hey, it's here. People use it. Here's another application or this version of that. I think that's usually the best signal that your timing is right. It probably also means you're going to have more competition working on that thing. But like, if your thing is like, oh, all these different things have to go right in terms of technological development, like I can't think of a single company that's big because they timed a market, like in terms of device development that way. Like even the mobile companies that became successful like once the iPhone was already out and like was selling out and like already fairly popular. It wasn't because they started developing it like 6 months in advance and were like, no, like the BlackBerry's going away, like this is going to be the thing. I think it's impossible to time markets that way.
Some thoughts that I was thinking to share, but after seeing our good friend here in the headset for the duration of the entire event, focusing on learning, seeing the value of what the technology can be, besides for just having a way for people to interact with each other. We saw an incredible power within virtual reality experience, where my original background, what brought me into this was seeing it in the military industry, which is one of the first industries to really see the value. These were courses that an Israeli army and their counterterrorism courses and simulations was doing this 10 years ago, 11 years ago, which really showed me the potential of where this technology can be and what are the uses. The original name of our company is the word nivra, which comes from a line in the Talmud which says, Bishvili nivra elam. For me, the world was created. And while that isn't something of being self-centered and selfish, of the whole world being created for me, what it does mean is that every single piece of technology that we see out there, every single tool that we see out there, is a tool that God has given us with which to serve Him. So, you know, we were talking about a couple of years back, 3 years ago, when we were starting to get into this, where it wasn't so crystal clear if VR was going to be a mainstream value or it might just be a fad that can come and go. No one had that confidence. But when you look at the world through the lens of, if I see something, this is something that I can know that I can serve Hashem with. If I see this technology, I can get an entire generation of children excited about learning, specifically when they're facing the challenges of technology and of the post-pandemic, on all of that they experienced. And we can get kids excited about learning, focusing. The information that he learned right here, he will remember that forever. And that is, 4 hours worth of classes. So when you see the world through the lens of, this is not just, VR or AI or AR or any of that, but these are tools that God has given us through which to serve Him, then it becomes extremely clear that there is a future with this. There will be the companies that will adapt through, because the only reason why it exists is for us to serve Him. And so if we have a tool that we know that we can bring value in serving Hashem with, we know there's a future here, and what better way to demonstrate that. So thank you, my friend, over here, and thank you.
And like addressing such an important problem, like absolute education, post-pandemic, like really, really big issue, and like also like a smart market, not to like take what was a very inspirational like spiritual point, but like a smart market to go to, because it's like you don't necessarily have to put the headset in someone's hands, right? You can sell to a school or an organization, and they might have kids for an hour, but like get them to go into a headset to do something, and that can be very powerful. And I do think that like we don't fully, I think as like society, I don't think we've like fully grasped the impact of like what like happened to kids over those years of being like cut off from like what was their normal way of learning and interacting with others. But I do think that the types of creative solutions you're working on offer something that like is a really beautiful way to grab someone's attention and teach them something they'll remember for hopefully the rest of their lives. So
there's also some other stuff that we have as well, just to know that we haven't only used our passion and creativity for the Jewish community. Due to the military background and being in education, we were actually in a school when there was a school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, and I was in a school that happened, and because of my security background and counterterrorism training that I've done throughout the world, we were able to understand that not only in the Jewish world, we also started a production and a full-on course that is for teachers in schools all across the world to help them prevent and mitigate and survive a live school shooting, which is something that it's not as palatable as in many other content subjects, but this is something that our entire country faces. We're averaging about a school shooting a week, and something that is unheard of, unacceptable. And while many political sides fall into the trying to harness that for their agenda, what's been happening over the last 10 years is that every single year more and more children are facing scenarios that they should have never dreamed of having to face at the same time. So being able to also utilize that type of security experience, that at the same time being in the schools, we're able to build the type of courses that can give the teachers the confidence through repetition of training without having to traumatize all the students, and give them the confidence through simulation that after having gone through that 6 or 7 times, they will have the confidence to stay focused and act and be calm. So there's not just within the Jewish world, we were also focused on building, tools that can bring light to, everybody and enhance the entire world, essentially fulfilling that of, if there's a tool that has been given to us, it is for us to bring light into the world.
I don't know of the studies in that context, but like I know, for example, in like surgeon training, the results are like profound in terms of like how much more rapidly surgeons learn their skills after like going through simulation rehearsing something. So I can only imagine in a scenario like that simulation rehearsal would be incredibly valuable. So
Thank you so much.
Good stuff, man.
Thank you, yes, thank you. Yeah. I think we can get up.
Yeah.
Thank you. I guess we have the gear.
If anybody would like to take a peek at some of the stuff that we created.
Thank you very much.
Hey,
I appreciate it.
Great topic.
Like that. Great questions, man. Really great job.
I appreciate that.
That was fun.
Yeah, I had a great time.